The morning I found out, I was standing in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold because I'd been frozen in place for 20 minutes staring at my phone screen. The number on the bank notification didn't make sense at first. $50,000, gone. And when I called my husband to ask what happened, he said 4 words that changed everything between us forever. I'll explain it later. He never explained it. What he did instead was come home that evening, sit across from me at the dinner table we'd bought together, and tell me with a completely straight face that he had transferred the money to his mother because she needed it. No discussion, no warning, not even a heads-up text, just gone, and I was supposed to smile and move on. That was the moment I realized the man I had married wasn't who I thought he was. And what happened over the next 3 months? It shook me to my core, exposed secrets I never expected, and ended in a way that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. Let me back up so you understand what we're talking about here. My name is Dana, and I've been married to Marcus for 9 years. We met in our late 20s when we were both just trying to figure life out, him working his way up in corporate logistics management, me building a small event planning business from the ground up. We weren't rich when we met. We were 2 people with student loans, second-hand furniture, and big dreams. What made our marriage work, or what I thought made it work, was that we were a team. Every decision, every major purchase, every financial move we made together. When we bought our house 6 years ago, we spent 3 months comparing neighborhoods. When we decided to start saving for IVF after 2 years of trying to get pregnant, we sat down and built a plan together. Everything was joint. Everything was discussed. That $50,000 savings account was the result of 9 years of sacrifice. Late nights, skipped vacations, the trips we said maybe next year too. The car I drove for 11 years because we didn't want a car payment. That money was physical proof of every hard choice we had made as a couple. It was sitting there for our future family. Marcus's mother, Claudette, had been a difficult presence in our marriage from the very beginning. She was the kind of woman who never fully accepted that her son had chosen a wife. Not me specifically, just the concept of a wife. Any woman who took Marcus's attention, his time, and eventually his last name was going to be a problem. But for 9 years I had managed it. I smiled at family dinners. I invited her to holidays. I bit my tongue more times than I can count. Claudette had always been financially irresponsible. Marcus knew this, had watched it his whole life, and had talked about it openly with me early in our relationship. His mother had a habit of spending money she didn't have, borrowing from people with vague promises to repay, and then acting confused when the bill came due. She had 2 brothers who had cut contact with her over money. Marcus had always said he understood why. He'd told me more than once, "My mother has a problem with money, Dana, we can't let her pull us in." Those words came back to me like a slap when I saw that bank notification. When Marcus sat down across from me that evening, I was completely calm. That surprised me, honestly. I expected to scream. Instead, I felt this strange, cold clarity settle over me, like I was watching everything from outside my body. He started talking immediately, which told me he had rehearsed this. Claudette had gotten herself into debt, bad debt, the kind with collectors calling. She'd taken out loans against a property that turned out to have a title dispute. She'd co-signed something for a man she'd been seeing that had gone sideways. She needed $50,000 or she was going to lose her home. I sat there listening, and when he finished, I asked him one question: "When did you find this out?" He looked at the table. "About 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? He had known for 3 weeks, watched me plan our budget, watched me research fertility clinics, watched me talk about our future, and said nothing. He had made the decision alone and transferred the money alone, and then waited for the bank notification to tell me what he'd done. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd say no," he said. And I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. Not "I didn't tell you because I was scared." Not "I didn't tell you because I panicked." He said he didn't tell me because he knew I would disagree, and so he just went around me, as if my opinion was an obstacle to manage rather than a voice he was supposed to respect. I asked him if he understood what that money was for. He said yes. I asked him if he understood what we had sacrificed for it. He said yes. I asked him how he intended to replace it, and that's when the conversation went from bad to catastrophic. He told me his mother would pay it back. Not with a timeline, not with a plan, not with any paperwork, just "she'll pay it back." And then he said something that I think about every single day since. He said, "Dana, she's my mother. I need you to be understanding right now and not make this into something bigger than it is." I slept in the guest room that night, and the night after that, and the one after that. I want to be honest about what those first few days were like. because I think people sometimes imagine that when something this big happens, you immediately go into warrior mode. You don't. I spent the better part of 4 days barely functional. I cried in my car before client meetings. I lay awake at 3 in the morning running numbers in my head, calculating how many years it would take to save that amount again while also managing a mortgage and trying to afford fertility treatments. Marcus, for his part, seemed to believe that giving me a few days would resolve it. He went to work, came home, made dinner like nothing had happened, and occasionally put his hand on my shoulder with this expression that said he thought he was being patient with me, patient, as if I was the problem. On day 5, he sat down next to me and said, "I need you to let this go, Dana. What's done is done. We'll figure it out, but I need you to stop being cold to me." I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said, "I'm going to need to see your mother's repayment plan in writing." His entire face changed. "She doesn't have a repayment plan in writing," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. "That's not how family works." I told him that was not how $50,000 works. I told him I wanted a signed agreement, a timeline, and a notarized promise that money would be returned within a specified period or we would pursue legal recovery. I wasn't yelling, I was completely steady, and the steadier I was, the more agitated he became. He told me I was being unreasonable. He told me I was treating his mother like a business transaction. He told me that if the situation were reversed, if it were my mother who needed help, he would have done the same thing without hesitation. That last part was interesting because my mother had in fact needed help 4 years earlier when she had a medical crisis. We had talked about helping her, discussed what we could afford, agreed on an amount that wouldn't derail our savings, done it together, but Marcus didn't remember it that way or chose not to. Over the next 2 weeks, things in our house became a cold war. Marcus started spending more time on the phone with Claudette, and I noticed that those calls happened in the garage or in his car, not in the house where I might hear. He started leaving for work earlier and coming home later, and he stopped asking me how I was doing, which was something he had done every single day for 9 years. I reached out to my best friend Lee and told her everything. Lee had never been Claudette's biggest fan. She'd seen too many family events where Claudette managed to insert herself into conversations, take credit for things, and subtly undermine me in ways that were hard to call out directly. Lee's first response was, "Dana, you need to know what's actually going on before you decide what to do." She was right, because something wasn't sitting right with me about Claudette's story, the debt, the property title dispute, the man she'd co-signed for. It all sounded dramatic and vague in the way that stories sound when they've been constructed to generate sympathy rather than to convey actual facts. So I started quietly looking into things. It took me about a week of careful searching to find what I needed. Claudette's financial situation was indeed a mess, that part was true, but the details Marcus had given me were incomplete in ways that felt deliberate. The property with the title dispute, that property was in Claudette's name along with another individual. A man named Gerald. Gerald, it turned out, was not just someone Claudette had co-signed a loan for. He was someone she had been in a serious relationship with for over 2 years, long enough that there were photos of them together at a family event Marcus had attended without me. Marcus knew about Gerald, he had to, and he had never mentioned him to me. Why does that matter? Because Claudette's debt wasn't some innocent accident that happened to a helpless widow. She had made a series of deliberate financial decisions with a partner. Those decisions had gone badly, and now she needed someone to bail her out. And Marcus had decided that someone was going to be us without telling me the full story. I sat with that information for 3 days before I said anything. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I moved my next piece. When I finally brought it up to Marcus, I did it simply. I told him I knew about Gerald. I told him I knew the property was co-owned. I told him I knew this wasn't just a random financial catastrophe, but the result of choices Claudette had made with a man who was apparently a significant part of her life. Marcus went very still, then he said, "Where did you get that information?" Not, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," not, "You're right, I should have been honest." The first thing he wanted to know was where I had gotten the information, as if the problem was that I had found out, not that he had hidden it. "Why didn't you tell me about Gerald?" I asked. He said it wasn't relevant. I told him that when we're handing over $50,000, every detail is relevant. He said I was making this about something it wasn't. I asked him what it was about. He said it was about helping his mother. I said it was about him deciding unilaterally to give away our life savings to clean up a mess his mother and her boyfriend had made, and doing it while actively withholding information he knew would make me say no. That was the first time I used the word manipulated out loud. I told Marcus that he had manipulated me, that hiding information to achieve an outcome is manipulation, even when the outcome feels justified to the person doing it. He told me I was being dramatic. He told me I needed to calm down. He told me, and this one I will never forget, my mother will always be my family. You need to understand that. I told him I understood it perfectly. And I told him that he needed to understand something too. I was done being quiet about this. 3 days later, I called his boss. I want to explain what led to that decision because I know how it sounds. I know some people will read that and think it was an overreaction or that I was being vindictive. I need you to understand the full picture. Marcus worked as a regional director of operations for a mid-size logistics company. Part of his role, a significant part, involved managing company accounts, vendor payments, and budget allocations. He had been in that role for 4 years and was well regarded. He was being considered for a promotion that would have been a significant salary jump. 1 week after our confrontation about Gerald, I got a call from my bank. They were flagging some unusual activity on an account I hadn't checked in a while, a small joint savings account Marcus and I had opened years ago and mostly forgotten about, separate from the main account. This one had about $12,000 in it left over from an old car fund. It was empty. Marcus had taken that money too, quietly without saying a word. He had drained a second account, and this time he hadn't even told me after. I only found out because the bank flagged it. When I called Marcus at work and he answered, I asked him about the account. There was a pause long enough to tell me everything, and then he said, I was going to tell you. I said when? He said when things calmed down. I want you to think about what that means. He was going to tell me when things calmed down. Meaning, when I had made my peace with the first theft, he was going to quietly introduce the second one and hope the momentum of my acceptance would carry through. He was managing me, strategically, deliberately. That was when I stopped thinking about this as a marriage problem and started thinking about it as a financial crime. Because here's what I knew at that point. Marcus had access to joint accounts. Marcus had demonstrated that he would drain those accounts without my knowledge or consent. Marcus was under financial pressure, the kind that doesn't go away with one transfer, because Claudette's situation was not a one-time fix. It was an ongoing mess with a man named Gerald still in the picture and no clear resolution. And Marcus managed money for his company. I'm not saying I knew what he was doing at work. I didn't, not for cert. But I knew enough to know that the pattern of behavior I was watching, the secrecy, the justifications, the moving money without telling anyone, was not a behavior that lived only at home. People don't compartmentalize that cleanly. A man who decides the rules don't apply to him with his wife's money has made a decision about what kind of person he is. That decision doesn't clock out at 5. I called his boss, Richard, on a Thursday morning. Richard and I had met several times over the years at company events. He knew me as Marcus's wife. He was always warm and professional. I did not call Richard to get Marcus fired. I called him because I believed Richard deserved to know what I had discovered about Marcus's relationship with money. I told Richard that Marcus had made 2 unauthorized transfers from our joint accounts totaling over $60,000, that he had hidden both of them from me, and that I was in the process of consulting with an attorney. I told Richard I was not calling to make accusations about Marcus's work. I told him I was calling because I felt it was the right thing to do, and I would want someone to tell me if our positions were reversed. Richard was very quiet during that call. He thanked me. He asked a few specific questions. He was professional and calm. He told me he appreciated my reaching out and would look into the matter on their end. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time. My hands were shaking. Not because I felt guilty, I didn't, but because I understood that what I had just done had a consequence I couldn't take back. Whatever was about to happen was going to happen. Marcus called me 4 hours later. His voice was different from anything I'd heard from him before. Not angry, not defensive, tight in a way that sounded like barely controlled panic. He said, "Why did you call Richard?" I told him the truth. I said, "Because you moved $62,000 of our money without my knowledge or consent, and I've been watching you operate like the rules don't apply to you, and I needed the people who rely on you professionally to be aware of what kind of decision-making they're dealing with. The silence on the other end of that call was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. Marcus came home that night and I could see immediately that something at work had gone badly. He looked hollowed out. He sat on the couch and didn't say anything for almost 20 minutes. Then he told me that Richard had put him on administrative leave pending a financial audit of his department. He looked at me and said, "You did this." I said, "You did this, I just stopped covering for it." What came out of that audit over the next 6 weeks was something I had suspected but hadn't wanted to fully believe. Marcus had been approving payments to a vendor account that didn't exist, a ghost vendor he had created using credentials that were just close enough to a real supplier to pass initial checks. The amounts were small individually, between $3,000 and $8,000 at a time, but over 14 months they added up. The company's forensic accounting team found a total of just over $78,000 moved through that account. The money hadn't gone to Claudette, it had gone into a personal account Marcus had opened that I didn't know about. I want to stop here and tell you what I felt when I found that out, because I think people expect me to say I felt vindicated. I didn't, not at first. What I felt was grief, pure, nauseating grief, because understanding what Marcus had done meant understanding how long he had been living a version of our life that I wasn't part of. 14 months. He had been doing this for 14 months. The $50,000 from our savings hadn't been the beginning. It had been the moment he needed to cover a gap, probably because the hidden account wasn't moving fast enough, or because Claudette's situation had become urgent and he needed a clean, accessible source. The account he'd drained was our money used to paper over the evidence of a much bigger deception. I sat in my attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon and listened to her explain my options, and all I could think was, who was this man I'd been sleeping next to? Claudette, for her part, did not respond gracefully when the truth came out. When Marcus's legal situation became clear, and it became clear quickly because the company pursued charges, she did what people like her always do. She found a way to make herself the victim. She told family members that I had destroyed Marcus's career out of spite. She told people that our marriage had already been troubled, which was news to me. She called Marcus's aunt and uncle and gave them a version of events where I was a cold, calculating woman who had always been looking for a way to bring her son down. She left out the parts about Gerald. She left out the parts about the ghost vendor. She left out every inconvenient fact and kept only the ones that cast her and her son in the softest possible light. Watching that happen was painful, but it was also clarifying, because I saw very clearly the ecosystem that had produced the man I had married. I saw where he had learned that the truth was something to manage, that honesty was optional when it was inconvenient, that the right story told to the right people at the right time could substitute for actual accountability. My attorney filed for divorce on my behalf 6 weeks after the audit findings became public. Marcus's legal team reached out almost immediately to discuss settlement, not because he felt remorse, I don't think, but because a drawn-out divorce proceeding would have complicated his criminal defense. He needed things simplified. The settlement process was not easy. Marcus tried, through his attorney, to argue that my act of calling Richard had been malicious and had contributed to his legal situation, as if the auditors had found fraud because of my phone call rather than because he had committed fraud. His attorney eventually stopped making that argument because it had no legal basis and was embarrassing everyone involved. What I received in the settlement was the house, which we owned outright at that point, the full amount of the original savings account balance acknowledged as a marital asset I had been wrongfully deprived of, and a structured repayment arrangement that his attorney negotiated partly because a judge was going to be far less sympathetic than I was. Claudette never repaid $1. I didn't expect her to. That was never really the point. The criminal case against Marcus proceeded and I wasn't a party to it. That was between him, his company, and the district attorney's office. What I know is that it moved forward. What I know is that the promotion he had been hoping for evaporated. What I know is that the career he had spent 15 years building was fundamentally altered by decisions he had made, not decisions I had made. I know that because when people started suggesting, even people I liked and trusted, that I bore some responsibility for what happened to Marcus professionally, I had to be very clear in my own head. I had not committed fraud. I had not hidden money. I had not made decisions that affected another person's life without their knowledge. I had made one phone call based on information I had every right to act on, and that phone call had initiated a process that uncovered what was already there. The hardest part of this whole story, the part I still work through in therapy, is not the betrayal of the money. Money can be rebuilt. The hardest part is the recalibration, having to go back through 9 years of memories and ask which moments were real and which were performances. There's a particular kind of loneliness in that process that I don't have adequate words for. You don't just lose the future you planned, you lose the past you thought you had. But here is what I know now, standing on the other side of it. I know that the moment Marcus told me to stay quiet was the moment he revealed exactly who he was, not who he had become, who he had always been underneath the version he chose to show me. And the moment I decided not to stay quiet was the moment I chose myself. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't calculated. It was just finally understanding at a molecular level that my silence was the architecture of his comfort, and I was done being that. I still live in the house we bought together. I repainted the living room a color Marcus never would have agreed to, a deep, warm terracotta that I love. I have a small garden in the back that I've been cultivating for the past year and a half. My event planning business has grown in ways I hadn't expected, partly because once the weight of that marriage lifted, I had energy I hadn't realized I was missing. I'm in therapy, real, honest, consistent therapy, working through not just what Marcus did but what I allowed for longer than I should have. Because there were signs, small ones, easy to explain away, the times he made financial decisions without fully consulting me and then smoothed it over. The times he dismissed my concerns about Claudette as oversensitivity. The times I felt like the work I put into our relationship was not equally returned and told myself I was being unfair. Those signs were trying to tell me something, I just wasn't ready to hear it. I'm ready to hear things now, that's what I keep coming back to. I'm not harder, I'm not colder, I'm not closed off. If anything, I'm more honest with myself and the people in my life than I've ever been, because I know now what the cost of comfortable silence is. If you're watching this and something in your gut is telling you that something is wrong, a pattern, a feeling, a number that doesn't add up, a conversation that keeps getting avoided, please trust that instinct. Not because I'm telling you your situation is like mine. Every situation is different, but because that instinct exists for a reason. It's your nervous system processing information your conscious mind is still negotiating with. Marcus told me to stay quiet, and I almost did. I almost convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth more than knowing the truth. I almost swallowed it because I loved him, because I'd built a life with him, because starting over at 38 felt terrifying and impossible and like something that happened to other people but not to me. The $50,000 is gone. Claudette still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Marcus is navigating a legal situation that he created entirely by himself. And me? I'm sitting in my terracotta living room on a Saturday morning writing this out because I think someone watching this needs to hear it. You are not being dramatic. Your money matters. Your voice matters. Your knowledge of your own finances is not optional. It's not negotiable, and no one in your life, not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not anyone, gets to tell you that your concern about your own financial future is something you need to manage down and keep quiet about. I called his boss. I would do it again, because what I was protecting wasn't just $50,000. I was protecting the version of myself that still believed she deserved to know the truth about her own life. And that version of me, she was right.